In this recording, I outline how the notion of a theoretical framework fits in with the concept of research and some of the factors that determine it and what it might manifest as. I'll start off by clarifying the relationship really between paradigm and a theoretical framework and the role of theory. I give 3 examples of theoretical lenses, and then I provide a specific examples that fits in with a particular theoretical framework. But to start off with, in order to determine your research approach, you need to consider the relationship between theory and research. And on the one hand, this generally speaking falls within 2 camps, if you like. You've got the inductive approach and the deductive approach. Within an inductive approach, you adopt a stance in which you're open to new ways of looking at things. New ways are welcomed, and you as a researcher have a key role. You're very much part of the research process, and this can be illustrated I don't know if you've ever seen Shane Delia's Spice Journey, a cooking show, but basically the premise of this show is he's a chef. He's traveling around different parts of the world. He hears how people cook traditional recipes, and then he takes those impressions, puts his own interpretation on those recipes, and comes up with a new approach or he comes up with a new dish, really, that is his take on that particular recipe. Now, obviously, when we're talking about research, we generally don't speak about cooking, but the idea is the same. You're using influences, you're generating a new stance on something that's drawing on existing knowledge, but you're very much part of the process. In the deductive approach, you're testing a clearly defined variable. So your approach, your research is really guided by the theoretical framework from the onset. And basically the whole process is whether or not the hypothesis holds or not. Another and probably more formal way of looking at this is put forward by Alan Bryman in his excellent book, Social Research Methods. And he's illustrating deductive theory, which was that letter, the 12-minute egg. The fact that you've got the theory very clear from the beginning. From that theory, you generate a hypothesis, which is derived specifically from the theory. That hypothesis frames your data collection, your findings that lead to the hypothesis either being confirmed or rejected, which in turn leads to a revision of theory. But it's a fairly linear approach. An inductive approach is much more open. You have observations and findings, and from those observations and findings you generate a theory. But to make sense of those observations and findings, you probably draw on an existing theoretical framework to help you generate that theory that you're coming to, or in the case before, the particular take on a particular recipe. So I'm going to try to illustrate this, and I'm particularly going to illustrate it from an inductive approach or perspective. Here we have a picture of a group of people who happen to be at their place of work. When this photo was taken, they were actually all doing the same thing, or they had been given the same task, but as you can see, what people are doing are quite different in this picture. So we're going to look at this photo, if you like, and try to relate it to 3 different theoretical platforms, if you like. Because the idea of a theoretical framework is that it's the lens that you view data from, or it's the platform that helps you make sense of the literature that informs you, the data, and also your interpretation of that data. So we're going to look at this from a constructivist, like socio-cultural perspective. Vygotsky, for example. We're going to look at it from a gender theoretical perspective, and it's not going to be a fantastic example, but it's just there to illustrate a point. And also from a socio-cognitive theoretical perspective. So to start off with, a constructivist approach, where the notion is that we're learning from collaboration, we're learning through language and speaking about things, we're generating knowledge by engaging with each other in a fairly hands-on task. So in this particular example, I decided to highlight or circle the two people in the foreground who appear to be in conversation. They're drawing on data from the computer screen to make sense of the things and to solve the task at hand. And they are having a conversation. So they're learning from each other. You could possibly also draw on the fact that one's older than the other and have been in the profession longer. So there's an element of mentoring going on there and learning from more able peers. So those are some examples of the types of findings that you might speak to from a constructivist theoretical perspective. In the next one, gender theory, well then you'd probably just look at the fact that there's one man and everyone else in this picture is a woman. And you would have a lot of inferences and factors, but from the same picture you focus on a different point than you did from another theoretical perspective. In the third example, a socio-cognitive theoretical perspective, and socio-cognitive theory is made up of basically three domains. Intrapersonal factors like intelligence, knowledge, motivation, self-efficacy, etc. Metacognition as well. Situational factors and the social context. And also behavioral factors. And Bandura is one of the key scholars in that area. So from that perspective, the same picture would be interpreted through a different lens. I might look at the individuals and I might look at what they are doing, so the behavior that the different individuals engage with, and also look at the kind of the specifics in relation to them, so their existing knowledge, how long they've been in the profession, what motivates them, their interest. I might look at their task analysis and their choices that they've made, the fact that they're doing different things and going about this task in a different way. I might look at the situational and the social dimensions, who's working with whom, and also, the behavioral factors, what people are actually doing. Lingering in the socio-cognitive theory, this is an example of, again, from the situational, social factors and learning actions, where the next step has been taken. Now this draws on a study on assessment as learning, and these were some of the theory that was generated from there by looking at the data that was collected through a lens of socio-cognitive theory. So from that perspective, if we start at the top with the situational and social factors, in the context of this particular study, the curriculum played a significant role because it was a situational factor that articulated the learning goals that framed learning. Teacher support was a particular factor because it provided scaffolding and feedback that were key things that came out of the data. Audience was a key thing. This was a writing project, and the notion of an audience was an important situational factor that the findings really pointed to in respect to what students wrote. Success criteria was another situational factor, and the use of a rubric. So, and all these and resources as well, like planning templates and exemplars. Within the data that I collected, these were all situational and social factors that were highlighted from the data. From an intrapersonal perspective, students and teachers' cognition, so their interpretation, their understanding and their choices was a significant aspect. Their metacognition, their ability to reflect on choices and their own learning. Their knowledge in respect to both content knowledge and skills. Their self-efficacy, so the confidence in the ability to complete the task, as well as motivation. So the intrinsic and the extrinsic factors, and the interest and values as emotional factors. Those were key so again, from this particular theoretical lens, those things stood out and I made sense of them by thinking of them as intrapersonal factors. In the third domain, learning actions or behavioral factors, things that stood out from the data was clarifying and sharing learning intentions. Help seeking, so initiating feedback and monitoring and checking learning and progress against goals was a key thing. Developing work, so applying, demonstrating knowledge, and also evaluating, so judging it against the criteria. And all these three domains within social cognitive theory, a key idea is that these different domains reciprocate with each other, so that human behavior is kind of framed by all these, and it's not a static relationship. These things kind of go back and forth and influence each other. And that is one example of data and findings from a particular study, how they made sense when viewed through a theoretical framework, and literally kind of generates this pyramid of fitting in to different ideas. So hopefully you found this helpful. It's one example of the role of a theoretical framework. Thank you.